Well, good afternoon, everyone. If I could have your attention briefly. Good afternoon. Hopefully you're enjoying a wonderful meal today from the bistro. I think there's plenty. My name is Jim Smarkle. I'm the Director of Enrollment Management. Just wanted to take a few moments while you're eating to talk a little bit about Weinbrenner Seminary, just because we don't want to presume that you necessarily know who we are. Certainly you're part of LeadershipOne, and we're glad you're here, and we're certainly hopeful that it's beneficial to you and the path that you're on. But we did want to take just a brief moment to talk a little bit about kind of who we are, in case on your journey you know of someone who's maybe looking to grow and be developed a little bit more from a kingdom perspective. So Dr. Sleesman will be up to officially welcome you at 12:15, but I wanted to just take a moment to talk a little bit about seminary. What is seminary? You know, it's actually a seminarium is a 16th century Latin term that can be interpreted in English as seedbed or plant nursery. And I think when you hear those descriptions, it gives you a little bit of a sense of what seminary is. It really is a place that individuals come and seeds are planted, they're nurtured, they're growing for a purpose beyond themselves. And Weinbrenner Theological Seminary is one of those places, a fully accredited institution of higher education. We offer master's degrees, a doctoral degree, a collaborative bachelor's degree with the University of Findlay, and even an institute for those who do not have a bachelor's degree to receive theological education. And since we're eating, probably the simple way to think about seminary is the 5 main food groups: Bible, theology, spiritual formation, church history, and what we might say Christian ministry, or the skills that go along with serving in ministry, whatever that might be, whether it's clinical counseling, so counseling from a Christian worldview or a biblical worldview, or it might be actually serving in a church setting or a parachurch setting, a missionary, or just being a deeper, more mature follower of Christ wherever He has you, what we would call the kingdom. And so that's who we are at Weinbrenner Seminary. Our ministry are individuals like yourself and others, and we shepherd you through this developmental process to grow and become more equipped and trained to serve and ultimately make a difference in the world, if you will. So that's who we are. There's brochures on the table that help describe that. I have the privilege in enrollment management of engaging individuals, hearing stories, this sense of call, these questions, this path of seeking. It's a wonderful privilege to hear these stories and walk with people. So if you know of someone, or if you maybe have some questions or are curious, certainly come and see me. We have a table outside with further information. I'd love to receive that and share and kind of walk with you. So again, just wanted to give you a little bit more of an idea of who we are at Weinbrenner as an institution of higher education and our purpose. Again, Dr. Sleesman will be up in about 7 or 8 minutes to formally welcome you prior to our speaker, Dr. Holba, coming. So welcome again, and continue to enjoy your time together. Thank you.
Welcome to our Beyond the Global Leadership Summit Luncheon. You were already greeted once by Jim Smarkle, and so we'll formally greet you again and say welcome. And so I'll introduce our speaker in a few moments, but let's go ahead and pause. I know all of us are already eating, but our God, who is infinite and beyond time, will understand if we say a prayer of thanks for our food after we've already completed. So let's go ahead and pray together. Father, thank you for allowing us to come together today. Thank you for this meal and for those that are able to be joined together in fellowship. Father, we pray that you give us the ability to pause during a busy week to reflect upon what you're challenging us with today. And Father, we pray for our speaker. We pray for our conversation around the table. And we're grateful that you've given us the ability to stop, listen, and allow your Spirit to work through us. We pray that your Spirit leads us through our time together today. Thank you for the gift of your Son, Jesus, and for the opportunity to be here today. And we pray this in your holy name. Amen. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. Annette Holba. She is professor at Plymouth State University in New Hampshire. And before I go further, if you're like myself and a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, it is very important for me to point out she is not a fan of the New England Patriots. So if you're not a football fan, see that? Thank you, Paul, I know. That is worth an applause by itself. But at Plymouth State University in New Hampshire, Annette teaches courses in communication, media studies, and philosophy. She's the author or co-author of several books exploring philosophy of communication, communication ethics, mindful leadership, and leisure. And in addition to her academic interests, she also served previously as a member and chair of a local health board of trustees. She joined our leadership team yesterday, where she was able to provide insight into some of the challenges that her own campus is going through as they figure out how you navigate in these challenging and tricky waters of higher education. And we're grateful for her coming and sharing and answering some of our questions there. It's hard to believe I've known Annette for almost 15 years. She's a well-respected academic colleague and a very willing conversation partner about all kinds of things at different times. But most importantly, I call her a friend, and it's my privilege today to introduce Dr. Annette Holba, who is coming to share with us about the Mindful Steward, extending leadership capacity and leadership reach through care. Let's welcome Dr. Holba.
Thank you all for coming today. Now, first things first, I don't watch football, and so that's why I'm not a fan of the Patriots. But I do know who Brady is because of the inflate or deflate gate scandal that happened. So, and also one more thing, if you can't hear me in the back, please tell me. And I was also told, because I have a lapel mic, if it gets kind of weird and you can't hear me, I have to flip my hair back. So I'm flipping it back so you can hear me, not because I want to flip my hair. Okay. So I'm here today to talk with you about how you can extend your leadership reach. The literature on leadership is vast, and it continues to grow by leaps and bounds. We are focusing our attention to one of the most important indicators of a successful organization, that is, its leadership. But I think leadership goes beyond the success of an organization or any one individual. I was asked to jump off of Jossie Chaco's presentation that he gave here last summer at Weinbrenner. And so I'm going to start by mentioning a few things that he talked about in his message, and then I'll take it forward. He said that we are all, this is where, oh dear, I have to use my clicker. Okay, there we go. He said that we are all entrusted with gifts and that we should seek to discover our gifts. We should help others discover their gifts, and we should use our gifts and multiply. So once we know that we're good at something, we ought to do something with it and move it forward in some capacity. In doing so, Jossie Chaco said, we can help in abolishing spiritual poverty by leading others to discover their gifts and empowering them to use their gifts, which can then create a snowball effect. This will become important later when I talk about my example. So Jossie Chaco told us a story about faithfulness and a lesson involving the responsibility we have to God of multiplying our gifts and of multiplying what we have been giving. So therefore, we're not hoarding what we have been given for our own self-edification. He harnessed the call about taking risks and doing more with what we have or what we are given. So he situated this as a starting place. And once we identify our gifts and talents, we shouldn't stop there. It's our responsibility, it's our ethical imperative to discover them, to use them, and then to multiply them however we think we ought to. So I believe that when a leader has gifts and uses them in the stewardship of others and not in the exploitation of others, that good things can happen. I believe that you can extend your leadership reach by being a mindful leader that begins with the other in the spirit of stewardship. In doing so, you'll have a great potential to cultivate others who themselves will go forth and multiply as leaders, paying it forward, so to speak. Before you know it, it becomes a viral disposition, and when this happens, anything can happen. From a religious position, God tells us this is our responsibility to our neighbor. From a philosophical position, Immanuel Kant tells us the same thing in his deontology, because at the heart of his categorical imperative rests the notion to not do anything that will prohibit any other person from reaching their fullest talents. As leaders, we should categorically make decisions that will help others reach their fullest potential. Of course, not everyone will agree with our vision, but that is okay. It at least opens a dialogue. So this requires three things. And the first thing is honoring and respecting the other. Today, especially after such a contentious political climate, it's hard to honor and respect the other when there's differences of opinion. But that is imperative for us to do. The second thing is providing them with opportunities to learn and discover their hidden talents. And then the third thing is to empower them to use those talents. Of course, using your talents and not hoarding them requires taking risks. Many of us are a little uncomfortable with taking risks, but risk-taking, if done mindfully, compassionately, humbly, and openly, can expand your reach beyond your own expectations. So this idea of gifts is central to extending your leadership reach. As a leader, you would want to do this, to help others reach their fullest potential and assist them in discovering their own gifts, and then encouraging and empowering them to use them. So this is the capacity. This capacity to do toward the other is very natural for the mindful steward. Now, a mindful steward does not have to be a person in positional leadership. You can have a mindful steward within the ranks of your organization. So I build this concept of mindful steward by using the core components of mindful leadership and steward leadership. So I'll describe each briefly, and then I'll give you an example. So first, the mindful leader involves embracing these three coordinates: intention, awareness, and compassion. So when I say intention, I'm really talking about your telos, or your aim. You're doing something with meaningfulness and purpose. So it's kind of like being able to respond to something rather than react to something. So when we react, we often react emotionally, and sometimes our intentionality isn't so intentional. So it gives us the capacity to be more responsive than reactive. Awareness allows us to see ourselves and to see others in their interiority. So beyond that external thing that you see when you go to work, beyond the physical attributes of the person, when you become fully aware or more fully aware, then you are seeing the interiority of the person. And that's a little bit different than just seeing someone who is 5'6" and 130 pounds and so forth. When you get to have this broader awareness of the other, that's when you can start to identify potential of the other. And then the third one is compassion, and that involves not judging others, and it involves using forgiveness and seeing the possibilities. And all of this requires us to set our egos aside, which is very difficult. So these three dispositions are not always easy to cultivate, especially in our outcome-driven and technologically impatient society that we live in. This is why I advocate that a mindful leader should cultivate their own mindfulness dispositions through a practice of some kind of mindfulness in their lives. So mindfulness, we were talking yesterday, we know that that's a term that is being used a lot lately, and it's rarely defined in the capacity in which it is used. But when I'm using mindfulness, I'm talking about things like meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, an activity where you're connecting mind and body, where you're emptying your mind from the busyness and the distractions of every day, and you're able to be present in your own present moment. By doing that outside of work, it enables you to embrace different kinds of decision-making and to cultivate these dispositions of the mindful leader. Second, the steward leader. If we think about it, stewardship is a component of servant leadership. So according to Robert Greenleaf, he defines servant leadership as employing listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, and some other attributes. And so I see it as a component of servant leadership, but I see it as being very different from servant leadership. And here's why. At the core of steward leadership, there is a care for the other that is primordial. You begin with a position of care for the other. So you are giving up of your own care for yourself in order to look toward the other first. This is different from servant leadership in that servant leadership focuses on the idea of serving, and servant leadership is fabulous. It's a great way to lead. It's a great way to think about how you can work in your organization. But the telos in servant leadership is situated in the serving, the idea of serving. And so it doesn't begin from a place of the other, or that having that primordial sense of care for the other. So all of these qualities in servant leadership are admirable, but the steward leader just begins from a different disposition. According to Scott Roden, he says that instead of starting with developing leadership skills or teaching one to be a better leader by measuring outcomes or of some kind of another, or focusing on those external things, that you start with the unseen, the part of a person that God knows and sees. This is the interior of a person. You care about that unseen part of the person. This is what rests at the core of the steward leader. So as I further think about these distinctions, I conceptualize steward leadership comes from the realm of the sacred, while servant leadership is situated in the realm of the secular, and by no means does it mean that a servant leader can never work or do their job in the realm of the sacred. That's not what I'm trying to say, but it doesn't begin in the realm of the sacred. So if we think of examples like Mother Teresa and Dorothy Day, they were stewards first. The care they exemplified for the unseen was a primordial care. And we get that from their actions and from conversations with them and from their writings. Neither of these categories or other kinds of leadership are incorrect, but it's the sacred aspect of the steward leader that I'm using to kind of put together with the mindful leader and talk about what it would mean to an organization to have a mindful steward, either as leader or many mindful stewards within the organization. I see mindfulness as orienting toward the hidden, and that's where the notion of the sacred is situated. So I want to share with you a little bit about my thoughts about the mindful steward before I talk about my example. The mindful steward as leader has 3 particular dispositions and takes particular actions in fulfilling their gifts. So the dispositions are care, having this idea and starting from the position of care for the other. That's your intention. And then also being able to see the horizon of potential, either in yourself or in others, but to really see this broader awareness of what the capacities are of others. And then to begin from a place of non-judgment. This helps to cultivate compassion, and this is where empathy is situated. All of these dispositions connect directly to the call to go forth and multiply, because this means to act, to take action and do something with your gifts. Being mindful allows you to explore and discover, to become aware of your gifts, then to heed the call to multiply, and you are called into action. So when we take actions, sometimes we have to take risks. So if these actions are mindful, they're intentional, so you have an intention. So risk-taking has a purpose, and you see where it goes. Of course, there's not a script, and you don't know where you'll end, and that's okay. And in your action, you'll be able to innovate. We innovate because we have an awareness of possibilities that allows us to do something different or something novel or something, that hasn't been done before. And then to be action-oriented even in uncertainty. Now, I know many of you are saying, oh my gosh, she's talking about the entrepreneurial leader. These are qualities of someone who has that entrepreneurial mindset. But if we're action-oriented, even in uncertainty, we can demonstrate compassion through the usage and through the being, or using non-judgment and being able to forgive others. So now a mindful steward might not be able to see as clearly as God sees that unseen part of a human being, but the mindful steward will take the time to be mindful and to observe and reflect and be with the other in a very authentic and caring way that will at least provide a glimpse of that unseen area of the individual. I can't talk about leadership and I can't talk about mindfulness without saying something about Joseph Pieper. I knew you knew this was coming. In placing all these dispositions together and these actions together, they actually encompass Joseph Pieper's 4 cardinal virtues. Pieper was a medieval scholar, he was a theologian, and he wrote many books. Perhaps you're familiar with his work in virtue, or happiness, contemplation, philosophy, and a bunch of other areas. Excuse me. So the 4 cardinal virtues are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. So any other virtue that we can list, because there's many different lists of virtues that we could identify. But Pieper would say that all of them fall under one of these 4 categories. So the mindful steward is a virtuous leader, and not necessarily from a positional framework. And I want to keep emphasizing that. I'm not saying that if you're not in a position of leadership that you can't lead and that you can't be a mindful steward. In fact, I think if you're not in a position of leadership, you have potential to change the organization in leaps and bounds if everyone in ranks begins to start from care for the other and set their ego aside. But it is wonderful when you have a person in a position of leadership being a mindful steward. So what I'm trying to say is that this is all about people. If people are reaching their fullest potential or using their talents and strengths, then they will evolve your organization. If people are happy at what they are doing and feel a sense of being a part of a larger story that has integrity, they will be loyal, persistent. They'll have fortitude in the face of risk, and they'll be resilient as your organization grows and evolves. This is the point where some people might say, well, this is really pie in the sky. And yeah, it is. But I would also argue that if you don't begin from a pie in the sky position, then you have no place to go. You can't reach your potential. Innovation and transformation really can't occur without some of that pie. I do have an example that occurred in 2014 in New England. that became very public in social media and mainstream media, and it was in the news from the East Coast, Northeast New England, over to California. So I don't know if anyone in here has followed it or heard about it, but there's a grocery store chain called Market Basket. Is anyone familiar with it, or anyone from New England? That is no. There's no hands that come up. Okay, so Market Basket is a grocery store chain. A little bit of history. The family came over. They were immigrants from Greece in the earliest part of the 20th century, where over in Greece they were a neighborhood market family. They immigrated to the States and they opened a grocery store chain in Massachusetts, and then when the father died who opened it, then his son, actually two cousins, ended up taking over the leadership, and so it kind of got muddy. And so I want to tell you their story and see what you think about the Mindful Steward. So my example really isn't about this one person, although it is. So I know I just contradicted myself, but it begins from the one person who sowed some seeds. He is responsible for cultivating a sense of organizational stewardship among people, including employees of the grocery store chain, his business partners, his customers, and basically the general public sentiment. Arthur T. DeMoulis, let me see if I have a picture of him. Okay, I know this has, okay, the sound guy's gone. I want to use my pointer. Let's see if this works. Oops. If I hit it again, can I turn it on? Oops, okay. So maybe this is the pointer? I don't know where the pointer thing is. Okay, I'll just tell you. Arthur T. is the man with the receding hairline in the picture. I don't know if you can see him. When you get home, you can Google Arthur T. DeMoulis, and you'll see some better pictures of him. The person on the other side is Arthur S. Imagine. Now I'm going to tell you a story about the Arthurs. So that's why I have to use their middle initial T, Arthur T. and Arthur S. So Arthur T. DeMoulis is the CEO of the Market Basket grocery store chain in New England. He is responsible for shaping one of the most compassionate leadership stories in the industry that we've ever witnessed. From an organizational perspective, people who study organizations, Market Basket is an example of an organization led by a mindful steward leader who built his company with an infrastructure that was based in stewardship. So he began with a care for the other. And he defines the other as customers, suppliers, vendors, warehouse workers, checkers, baggers, mid-level management, upper-level management, anyone who would have some kind of reason to walk into a Market Basket grocery store. He designed processes and policies within the organization that had the care for the individual and their families, actually, in mind first, before he looked at assessments, or before he assessed measures and outcomes with the business. You know, how are we doing financially? He really set the stage by caring for the other first. So this one man spread his leadership reach by being a mindful steward, caring for the other and setting his ego aside. And we'll see as I continue with the story, we'll have a sense of how he did that. On June of 2014, Arthur T. DeMoulis was the then president of the Market Basket Corporation. He and two top executives were fired by the board of directors. And the board of directors were controlled by Arthur S., his cousin. The history of this situation, actually, the reason why Arthur S. has 50.5% or had 50.5% control of the company was concerning a financial dispute that they had in the 90s, and the courts awarded Arthur S. the majority say in the company. So Arthur T. and some top executives were fired in June of 2014. In July, after some top management individuals who worked with Arthur T. were fired as well, employees of one Market Basket store in Massachusetts stuffed shoppers' bags with a pamphlet entitled, "We are Market Basket and we need your help." The brief pamphlet told the customers that employees were concerned about losing their jobs, losing their working conditions, losing their social policies that made the organization feel like a family, and which also made a difference in their personal lives, so not just their organizational life. Additionally, executives at Market Basket headquarters in Tewksbury, Mass. Began organizing for Arthur T.'s return by sending a non-negotiable demand to the executive offices stating they wanted him to be returned to the helm to run the company. The company issued a statement saying they're trying to be respectful to the employees to work through these challenges, but it did not address the non-negotiable demand, so they were not open for any dialogue. They didn't want to hear from the other people who worked and who were responsible for making Market Basket what it is, which was one of the most well-respected and most shopped at grocery store chains in New England. So later that month in July, more than 2,000 employees rallied outside their headquarters demanding a return of Arthur T. Demoulas, despite a warning from the chief executives that they would be fired if they left their work, if they were working that day to attend the rally. Some people did get fired. The 8 employees as well who organized the protest were fired. Some of them had worked for Market Basket for over 40 years. In response, the workers organized a second rally in Tewksbury. Over 5,000 people came there. Demoulas' picture was posted in the aisles of Market Basket while the shelves were empty. So imagine all the grocery store chains in Massachusetts and New Hampshire had empty shelves. Customers were no longer shopping at Market Baskets, and they were going to another, can I say the other store that's more expensive? Actually, every other chain in New England is more expensive than Market Basket. So people were biting the bullet and paying more for their food because they wanted Arthur T. to come back. Arthur T. announced, finally, he broke his silence, and he announced that his side of the family would try to buy the 50.5% of the company from his cousin so that he could be fully responsible for the organization. It took our 2 governors, New Hampshire and Massachusetts, to come together and sit with the board of trustees, sit with the Arthurs, and say, enough is enough. If your company, because they were losing millions of dollars a day, and each store was, and if it would have gone on further along in the summer and into fall, people would really lose their jobs, and the region would suffer dramatically. The biggest rally was held late in July, and about 6,000 people came there. And they tried to give a petition that had 100,000 signatures to the Board of Trustees and say, let Arthur come back, and they were not allowed to give their petition over. And of course, people got fired for attending that rally. So the chief executives basically threatened the employees and said, if you don't go back to work, you're all going to be fired. And many of them were. And then by the end of August, there was a deal made because the Board of Trustees had to do something or they were going to get nothing. So here it is. Arthur T. was able to buy the company for $1.5 billion. The company was worth at the time about $3.5 billion. And he immediately returned to operational authority, and he immediately hired back every single person who was fired, and he immediately cut checks for them so that they would receive what they would have received if they worked all summer. So retroactively, they were compensated. There's a book entitled We Are Market Basket, and you can get that if you're interested. It was written by Daniel Corsham, and he partnered with a Boston Globe reporter to highlight the stories. And the stories are very endearing about a very caring individual who wanted to run a company based on, the other. for employees first, vendors first, and then let's make a good thing and hopefully we'll survive as a business. That was his kind of rationality. Arthur S. had a different rationality. Arthur S. Enjoyed race cars and loved to be driven around. When he had to go to the stores, he would be driven by a chauffeur in a luxury car. Arthur T. drove a Prius, went to the stores, several stores a day. He would go in and walk the aisles, and he would talk to people from baggers to checkers to anyone, warehouse workers, anyone who he saw. He didn't know all of his employees' names. There's too many to know. But if you're an employee and he finds out that your spouse or child dies, he'll go to the funeral. He'll sit in prayer with you. There's many stories that this book shares with the care that Arthur T. had for his employees. One of the stories involves an individual whose daughter was in a very bad car accident. She was paralyzed, and they didn't know if she was going to live. Arthur T. goes to the hospital when the family is there in their deepest, darkest hour, and he says to the family, "Do we have to move her?" So he uses inclusive language, whether he knows you or not, but if you're a member of the Market Basket family, you're a member of his family, and he cares. And then he offered to move her to a different facility at his expense. Some of the other things that he did as far as his business practices are concerned is doing educational reimbursements. So if you want to go to college, you can pay for your own college through Market Basket because they'll pay for it. They'll reimburse you as long as you get a C or better. And I've had many students who work at Market Basket and who've paid their way through college at Plymouth State through Market Basket. He also offered health care for all of his employees, so whether you were part-time or full-time, you could have health care. So he was very flexible with people's schedules. If you had to all of a sudden take care of a parent who had a stroke, or if you had child care challenges and you had to be home and you had to adjust your schedule, there's no question about it. You just do it. You find a way to navigate. And his sense of stewardship and caring for the needs of the other filtered through, and he sowed the seeds through all of his management folks, all the way down to the workers. I hate using the down thing because Arthur would slap me in the face and say, "It's not really down, we're in this together." But I say down because he didn't care if you were an entry-level worker. He started like that in his parents' store. And he allows people to start there and to move up. He looks for people. He gives people responsibilities and says, if you like this, we can train you. If you don't like it, it's okay. You can do something else. He wants to keep the employee happy. And that comes through to the customers because they're happy at their work. So anyway, what I do is argue that Arthur T. had a care for the person that is unseen. He had a primordial care for the employees, and it didn't matter what level they were workers. To me, he exemplifies the mindful steward because he had care and compassion. He started with having this intentionality of care. He was able to see, he had a very broad awareness and was able to see the horizon of potential in his employees. And I'm not just saying this because I think it's pie in the sky. People told me this. When you hear the stories of the people. At the time that he got fired, he did a very interesting thing. People felt empowered to tell their story. So Facebook lit up. Instagram lit up with pictures. There were tweets. I don't do Twitter, but there were tweets everywhere about Market Basket. And at no other time in the labor history in this country did management and employees come together. Usually management and employees are separate, right? You have a mediator of some kind. You have a union. That's not the case with Market Basket. They came together to fight for what they thought was best for the organization because it was their home. And Arthur S. had the intention of taking away their health care, of taking away their educational reimbursements, of not being flexible with their schedules. He wanted to give, and all the employees, which, this is a big part, all of the employees would get dividend checks. So they all reaped the profits of the company. So you could be a checker or a bagger, or someone in middle management, or someone in the warehouse, or a top executive, and you'd be getting a bit of the profits. Arthur S. wanted to take that away. His intention was to give the Board of Trustees much of the profits, in the millions of dollars. So when we compare the two, they're just two different kinds of leaders. One is a traditional positional leadership individual, and another one is a steward leader who incorporates mindfulness into his life and who exemplifies mindfulness and care to the other in his working. I say by being a mindful steward, when the full-on attack came from the majority side of the Board of Trustees and his cousin, that Arthur T. had already sown the seed of leadership across his company because they all came together and they took a stand in the ways that they could. Some could use Facebook, some could use Twitter, some couldn't, but they did other things. And they extended his leadership reach, and they saved the company because ultimately Arthur T. does now have control of the company. And he's continuing to expand, even though it had to be a financial challenge for him to buy the company for $1.5 billion. So let me conclude here. How do I see that you can extend your leadership reach? By being a mindful steward, incorporating a primordial focus of care toward others, by leading with attention, awareness, and compassion. Market Basket was fortunate that the CEO happened to be a mindful steward. The mindful steward can awaken the leaders in your organization. Arthur T. DeMollis treated people with dignity, respect, and compassion. He met them in the realm of the sacred, and from there, they discovered their talents, and it went viral. Today, he is back at the helm of Market Basket. He continues to share his power, profit, and presence with his employees. The mindful steward leads from a place of care. So this is one way how you can extend your leadership reach. So now, I probably talked a whole bunch. I did, sorry. There are questions on the table, and so we can either do one of two things. We can, I would say, with those questions, think about them. Think about what you can do as a mindful steward and take back to your organization. And truly think and reflect. Be with yourself. There's also one question on there that, where is it? Number 4, since the mindful steward begins from a mindfulness orientation, what do you do in your own personal life that is a mindfulness practice? And if you don't, what could you do? Because it really starts from the individual, no matter where you are in your organization. And if you can learn to engage mindfulness and have this intention, awareness, and compassion for others at the center of your being, you can change the world. So you can either talk amongst yourself. I don't know how much time we have, Dr. Sleesman, 10 minutes? Or we can do Q&A. So let me ask you what you want to do. What is it that you want to do? Do you want to talk with each other, or do you have questions?
We could do 10 minutes at the table and 5 Q&A.
So that's 15 minutes? Okay, so 10 minutes at the table, talk to each other, engage, and then we'll come back and do 5 minutes.
We call these events Beyond the Global Leadership Summit Luncheon. so that we can take the concepts outside the walls of the August event, the Global Leadership Summit, take it beyond our walls here at Weinbrenner, and let it go into your churches, your businesses, your homes. And so as we think about Dr. Holba's presentation today, you might have questions of clarification about some of the concepts that she was talking about. You also might have a question of application. How does something that she discussed apply to you? So you might think in those two realms, but how can we take these ideas beyond not just Jossie Chaco, not the Global Leadership Summit, but beyond Dr. Holba, beyond Weinbrenner Seminary, into your churches, your homes, your businesses, into your vehicles as you're transporting? What are some questions you may have that you'd like her to respond to? Questions of clarification about concepts, or questions about application in your particular concept? Are there questions that you'd like to, comments or questions that you'd like to provide in response?
Could you help Brent be more mindful? No, he's a great leader. So we're talking at the University of Findlay table over here, how you have how to keep those four virtues always in front of you when you're dealing with people who are far less mindful than they should be. Because we don't always, because our author T's and author S's switch personalities all day long.
Yeah.
So it's not that simple, right?
It is not that simple. So I know I can just speak from my own experience. Like I made a distinction in the beginning about reacting or responding as opposed to reacting to something. And for me, it's taken having a habit or a practice of mindfulness. So I meditate. I actually am a certified meditation instructor, so I've had a lot of instruction in meditating. So I'm able to take a deep breath and to pause before I do something else that can escalate a situation. And I'm an advocate. My dissertation years ago was on leisure. And for me, leisure is not recreation, and that's a whole different presentation. But having a practice of mindfulness or leisure in your life can enable you to see the bigger picture and take the higher road when your buttons are being pushed. And that does happen. It's a challenge because typically when we're little, we grow up and we learn to manipulate people because we're hungry or because we want this or that and we're so cute we can get it. And so we're driven by our ego. And setting the ego aside, I think, is essential to being productive in the workplace. And we were talking at the other table. And I'm at Plymouth and I have colleagues that I don't like. I have colleagues that I don't want to work with. And I have colleagues that have been really mean for one reason or another. You know what? That's okay. Because they're at a place, I look beyond that external stuff that they do, and they're at a place in their life that I don't know all about it, and so they must be dealing with something. So I have to pause, and I have to go back and find my own ground and presentness in order to come back into the conversation and try to move it forward. That's all I can say. There is no answer to that, but that's probably the hardest thing to do. Yeah.
We have time. Is there one more question that anybody would like to raise in response today?
So thanks for sharing that wonderful story at the end. So Arthur T., so businessman, owner, I don't know, how many employees?
Many, over 600.
Over 600.
Yeah.
And he was in business to make money, correct? At least $1. I mean, you have to make money to be in business.
Arthur S. was in business to make money. Arthur T., of course you have to stay afloat, but when he was very young, he would watch his father let neighbors come and buy food when they didn't have money. So all those things I think, cultivated a sense of compassion for the other that sometimes outweighed that I need to earn a buck.
Gotcha. So Arthur T. had to make some decisions that we as leaders, whether it's churches, whether it's businesses, whether it's family, we have compassion. We have to make some tough decisions. Could you
Yes.
share with the group, because I haven't read the book, that's fascinating.
Oh, there's also, I don't know if I told you, there is a documentary now. If
Yeah.
you don't want to read, get the
Okay.
documentary.
So maybe just share with the audience maybe some tough decisions that Arthur T. had to make in some of those years. I mean, and you couldn't just hire employees and let them run around the store and do whatever they wanted to. And you couldn't just let customers come in and just take stuff. You know, there had to be some templates, some processes
Yes.
put in place, and some decisions that Arthur T. had to make at some point over the evolution that maybe weren't all that great. Maybe you could share that with the audience as a leader.
I can give you two
With
examples.
compassion. Yeah.
If you go into Market Basket, you're going to see employees wearing, dressing like, what's the expression, business casual on Fridays. And although all of management has to wear a tie, so he has kind of a rigid dress code. And this dress code is not just for the people out on the floor. They're for people who are in the warehouse too, just to be presentable. The idea being you care about what you want to, you care about the organization in a way, you know you're representing it, so when people see you, they see you in a very dignified way. Not a lot of people like that, because I've had students that work for him that, don't want to wear casual Friday, they want to wear their jeans. They want to wear shirts that they don't need to iron. I mean, face it, a lot of students don't have an ironing board when they go to college. So those are kind of small examples where he had standards, and also to address someone as Mr. or Mrs. rather than hey there. So there were communicative behaviors that he institutionalized at the organization. But see, that's why I love those students who mission and values are amazing. But it's not like he did everything and he always had, gold, or that everything turned out good for him, because he had to make some decisions occasionally to either close down a warehouse or close down a store, which, what does that do? Puts people out of business. And you couldn't retool everyone to go do something else in one of your other stores. So it wasn't beyond him to make those decisions, but they would be, his last resort if he had to do it. So no, he's not this like perfect being, of course, but he did have some hard and fast rules about how we engage the other in respect, and he also was able to make those rough decisions when you have to let people go. And I will say, I'll just say I'm sorry, Dr. Sleesman. I will say one thing. The way he would fire someone and the way Arthur S. would fire someone would be two different ways of doing it. So I still think he carried that care for the other with him.
We would certainly like to give Dr. Holba a hand for all
Thank
the
you.
information she was able to pass on to us today. My name is Lisa Crawford, and I'm the Assistant Coordinator of LeadershipOne, and we thank you all for being here. There are some other people in the room we would like to thank, and those are your table hosts. For those of you who were at a table with a host, give them a little applause for helping out. We want to do our drawing, and we know some of you need to get right out the door, so we will do that right now. We have a book and DVD set by Craig Greschel, and the winner of that today is Carl Heminger. Are you still in the room, Carl? Yes. There you are. Lisa has that. And I will grab one more, and that is a book by John Maxwell, and Jessica Poopery wins that. We encourage you, there you are. We encourage you to take your folders home. In them is a list of the events that you've seen scrolling here so that you can look into those upcoming events. One that I would like to highlight is a women's conference that is happening March 10th and 11th. So women in the room, if you would like to be refreshed and equipped and empowered to be a leader in your communities for the sake of Christ, we very much encourage you to look into this conference. There is 1 week before the price changes, and so we want you to be able to take advantage of that. So visit theflourishconference.org. And then lastly, before you leave, please keep in mind that you'll be receiving a survey tomorrow sometime that will allow you to tell us what you liked today, what you would like to see changed for future luncheons. And our next luncheon coming up, the date is not set yet because we are waiting for the Global Leadership Summit, part of the organization at Willow Creek, to announce when their speaking video is ready for us to show, and then we will gather back here as a precursor to the Global Leadership Summit coming up in August. And so our next luncheon will be focused on that, and we would love to see every one of you back here with others at your table to take advantage of that intensive leadership training that happens in August. But take what you've learned today and please use it and be a mindful steward leader. Thank you for being here.